Part 145. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1443. Bezo kicked the stones under her feet, her eyes were a little red. Xiaofu, who ran over, was startled, and asked anxiously, "What's wrong with you? Who bullied you?" Bezo shook her head, pouted and said with a little aggrieved, "My mother is going to say kiss to me, but I think I am still young, and it will be too late in 2 years, but my father will not stand by me this time. Here, to say that I am old is to say kiss." Xiaofu was startled, and said in a daze, "Actually, it's not too early." Bezo felt uncomfortable when she heard the words, but she didn't know why. She just stared at him with red eyes. Xiaofu's face turned red. He vaguely knew that this was an opportunity created by his fourth aunt. Bezo was 13 this year, the age at which he wanted to marry. In the past 2 or 3 years, he clearly knew that he was pursuing Bezo, but Bezo didn't know it, and still treated him like an elder brother. If the window paper is not pierced, people outside will never be able to see inside. Even if he is in the window, he can only vaguely look at her figure. Xiaofu looked at Bezo's cheeks that were as white as jade, and summoned up his courage to ask, Then who do you want to marry?" Bezo shook her head blankly. Xiaofu blushed, and asked almost inaudibly, "Then, what do you think of me?" "What?" Bezo looked at him blankly, but didn't hear clearly for a while. Once the words were spoken, the tight string in Xiaofu's heart was loosened, and it was easier to say the following words. He took a deep breath, fixed his eyes on the orb, and said word by word, I am happy. For you, what do you think of me marrying you?" Although Xiaofu is not as smart as his elder brother, he still has high IQ and EQ. If he wants to be nice to someone, he has a lot of ways. At the beginning, he followed the method taught by his father, but later he found a suitable method for him to create a sense of presence in front of the orb. When Bezo was still ignorant, Xiaofu led her into the trap step by step. Once she got in, she got stuck in the mud and couldn't get out again. Bezo's cheeks flushed red, flustered for a while, then she raised her chin proudly and said, "Then you go to my parents to propose marriage." After all, he turned around and ran away in shame. The smile on Xiaofu's face couldn't be suppressed no matter what. He turned around and ran home. Bezo's proud appearance always appeared in his mind, echoing those words constantly. The joy in his heart almost overflowed. He couldn't help but jumped a few times on the road, and accidentally stepped on a stone and fell to the ground. Before the servant behind him stepped up to help him, he got up on his own, screamed excitedly, and continued run home. Xiaofu's servant stiffened and stretched out his arms. Seeing the young master so happy, he felt amused and worried at the same time. He didn't know what the princess said to the master just now, but he was so happy. Xiaofu ran all the way home, and rushed into his father's study. The steward guarding the study said profusely, "Second young master, the lord is not in the study." Xiaofu turned around and almost bumped into the steward. The steward was terrified, but Xiaofu grabbed his hand indifferently and said, "Then what about my father?" The steward couldn't help wiping off his sweat. "Second young master, today is not a day for the prince to rest and take a bath. He is naturally in the palace on business, and it is also possible that the household department." It was only then that Xiaofu remembered that it was not time for his father to go down to the office. He anxiously walked around in place 3 times, then turned around and ran to the backyard. The servants of Anjun Prince's mansion didn't know what had happened, but seeing the second young master in such a hurry, they all felt that something big happened to the mansion, or the second young master caused a catastrophe. Everyone is more inclined to the latter. But Xiaofu's servant and the steward of the study knew that they were neither. Although the second young master was in a hurry, the joy in the corners of his eyes could not be concealed from others, and the steward who was facing him saw his eyes so bright that they blinded people. Xiaofu stumbled into his mother's room and knelt down with a boom, which startled Xiao Xia and everyone in the room. Ziofa kowtowed to his mother. "Mother, my son asks you one thing." Xiao Xia hurriedly dropped the thread in her hand to pull him, and said distressedly, "What do you need to ask for? Get up quickly." Ziofa couldn't afford it, so he simply lay on his mother's lap, looked up at his mother eagerly and said, "Mother, go and propose to your son, my son wants to marry Beizu as his wife." Xiao Xia didn't know whether to laugh or cry, just for this matter? Then you don't need to beg like this. Didn't your father and your fourth uncle make an agreement a long time ago? But now Sister Beizu has agreed to marry me, Ziofa said with piercing eyes. "Mother, hurry up and tell fourth aunt that you don't need to take Sister Beizu out to socialize anymore, and our two families should settle the marriage as soon as possible." Seeing his son Baba's appearance, Xiao Xia felt sore and proud at the same time, touched his head with distress, and said softly, "Beauty is not such a simple matter, even if our two families know each other very well, we can't be slow the etiquette, otherwise it is Beizu who is wronged. Mother prepared a small gift for you as early as when your father mentioned this marriage, even the things needed for engagement, but when you come to mention it, you always have to choose an auspicious day. We need to hire a better official media." Ziofa was very anxious, but he didn't want to wait any longer. He walked around the room twice in a hurry, and said, "Then let father go and tell fourth uncle first, our two families will also start preparations." Xiao Xia couldn't help poking his forehead, and said helplessly, "What's the use of being anxious now? Beizu is only 13, and you have to wait at least 3 or 4 years to get married. Your fourth uncle and four aunts don't want her to get married so early." Ziofa was stunned for a moment, and then remembered what my fourth aunt said, "No matter whether it is a boy or a girl, they have to be 18 years old before they can get married, and the children of the royal family are especially late, not only for their own health, but also for the sake of their offspring." And Beizu, who ran back to her own room, had her cheeks flushed red, and she hid under the quilt for a long time in embarrassment, constantly recalling the details of getting along with Ziofu in the past 2 years in her mind. Thinking that her mother would take her to the Li family's flower banquet tomorrow, she immediately lifted the quilt, put on her shoes and ran to find her mother. Chi Heiran asked Zhang Qin to play for Mu Yangling. After they learned it well, they could take the piano with them when they went out. From now on, she would play the piano while he danced the sword. But Mu Yangling's musical talent is not very good, so he can only work hard, but even so, Chi Heiran is disgusted. While Mu Yangling is learning from his husband, he criticizes, "The sound is wrong again, it's all wrong 3 times, you are so stupid." Mu Yangling immediately played again, and this time the flow was still slightly stagnant, but it was better than the previous one. Chi Heiran continued to curl his lips, "The tiger head is smarter than you, he will learn it 2 or 3 times, why are you still error?" Mu Yangling didn't say anything, but the musician who taught her couldn't help but get angry. "My lord, the princess has been making progress. Although talent is lacking, it is hard work. What's more, this transliteration is difficult. Learn it once or twice. It won't be normal." The musician took a deep breath and said unbearably, "My lord, now I am teaching the princess to play the piano. If you have any objections, then you can teach the princess yourself. The little one is really helpless. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1444. The musician felt that the rumors were really unbelievable. It was rumored that Princess Rong was a Hedong lion, so that Prince Rong didn't dare to take a concubine, and even went out to visit flower houses. But he only came to the mansion to teach for half a month before he knew the rumors were false. The concubine's temper is obviously very good, he has never seen her get angry, even if she can't learn it, she just practiced hard over and over again, never complained, let alone blamed him for not teaching well. On the contrary, the prince and the princess would get angry or ridicule if they made a mistake, and their temper was extremely bad. The musician endured it for half a month, but today he finally couldn't bear it anymore. Mu Yangling looked at this gentleman in amazement, seeing him standing on the side with his body straightened, staring at Chi Heiran angrily and warily, and couldn't help but smile. She finally knew why Chi Heiran would rather wait for 2 more months. It's time to find this gentleman for her. Chi Heiran stood beside his wife in embarrassment, and was about to save face with a stern face, when Mu Yangling patted the back of his hand reassuringly, stood up and saluted the musician respectfully. Sir, they are all students, not good. I must practice harder to ensure that the transition of this passage is smooth. The musician's expression turned pale, and Chi Heiran had also stepped down, so Mu Yangling said with a smile, Sir, please sit down, let's start over. When the musician turned around, Mu Yangling gave Chi Heiran a warning look. Chi Heiran thought that in order to invite this musician, he not only waited 2 months longer, but also sacrificed several family favors to jump in the line. It is really not worthwhile to drive him away now. He could only shut his mouth and stand aside. Mu Yangling's piano skills are really not good. She has learned it intermittently before, but she is not good at it. Now that she picks it up again, she has to learn from the basics. It doesn't sound good. After all, if you play a section and break it, maybe Mu Yangling will make 2 wrong notes. Of course, it's nothing to the ears of people who don't know how to do it, but Chi Heiran knows how to play. Although he is not very good at playing the piano and flute, at least he can play a few famous songs fluently. This is the importance of childhood education. So Chi Heiran listening to Mu Yangling playing the piano is really a kind of torture, but he is willing to stand here and listen. Even if he doesn't go out to play, Mu Yangling can't do anything about him. He doesn't go out to play, but he's still happy to see his daughter come to see them, which means his ears can rest for a while. The musician held the piano and went down, leaving room for the family of 3. Bezu immediately ran into her mother's arms, holding her hand and blushing, saying, Mother, I won't be going to Li's flower banquet tomorrow. Why? We answered the post early in the morning, and I asked someone to reply. Bezu pouted and said in a low voice, I won't go on a blind date. Chi Heiran frowned, but Mu Yangling asked with a smile, why did you go back on your word? Bezu blushed for a while, and finally leaned into her mother's ear and whispered, I want to marry brother Ziofu. Seeing their mother and daughter whispering, Chi Heiran stared aside with a pair of eyes, hoping to remind his daughter to think of him. Obviously Bezu loves to share secrets with him the most, so why didn't she look for him this time? Instead she looked for Aling? Maybe it was because her father's eyes were too hot. Bezu sneaked a look at her father after she finished whispering. Mu Yangling laughed when she saw it, rubbed her head and said, what a silly girl, whispering in front of your father. Do you think you can hide it from your father? Bezu. That's right, my father has deep inner strength, so what's the use of whispering just 3 steps away from him? Chi Heiran. So his daughter is finally getting engaged? The 2 children hit it off, and they were childhood sweethearts. The 2 families had reached a consensus long ago, and the engagement was very fast. Fan Zijin chose an auspicious day after returning home, and invited an official media to visit Prince Rong's mansion, and went through the procedures within 3 days, and only waited until the day was decided. The news of the marriage between Prince Rong's mansion and Prince Anjun's mansion quickly spread throughout the capital, and those powerful families who aimed at Bezu and Ziofu's marriage all gritted their teeth. Isn't this internal digestion? How shameless! Some ministers worried that the marriage of the 2 families would be detrimental to the government, but Qi Ziyuan was very happy, and said to Li Jinghua, Bezu has a domineering personality, and I have always worried that if she agrees to her husband's family, if she does not get along with her husband's family, then Heiran will have to tear down the family. Now well, the 2 of them are together, and neither can dismantle the other. Li Jinghua laughed and said, you can just gloat, be careful that the young couple really quarreled, and Heiran and Zijin would come to you. Qi Ziyuan curled his lips, Obviously he also had this concern, so he didn't want to give marriage to the two of them. He just made Bezu a princess, and said to the two who came to ask for it, "You have all made a small engagement, and the marriage is not good. The meaning of marriage is not very big. How about I give Bezu a princess mansion close to you?" Chi tilted his head for a while and agreed. Fanzijan glanced at Chi, and then at the slightly guilty emperor. He understood why he refused to decree the marriage. He must be afraid that they would quarrel with him in the future. Fanzijan thought of Xiaofu's love for Bezu, curled his lips, and thought to himself, it's no wonder that the two children are blushing. Even if they are really blushing, they won't make trouble in front of them. The marriage of the two was quickly settled, but the day of marriage was still far away. The adults did not stop the two children from meeting, so the three of them still got together to play together. The little leopard didn't come back to his senses until the dust of the marriage was settled, looked at Xiaofu with a bit of a headache and said, "We used to be brothers, but now you have become my brother-in-law, so in the future I will call you cousin or call your brother-in-law." "Xiaofu, you can call me cousin, and then call Bezu cousin." Bezu immediately looked at the fourth brother with piercing eyes. "Little leopard, brother-in-law." Bezu was so angry that he stretched out his paws to scratch him, and the little leopard ran away laughing. After running tired, he spread his arms and legs on the grass, and said with a smile, "That's it, you are engaged, and our fleet is also formed well, we can go to sea soon." Little leopard counted with his fingers, "When we come back from overseas, you will almost be able to get married." Xiaofu couldn't help but feel a little sad when he heard the words. He had just gotten engaged to Bezu, and they were about to separate. Bezu's eyes rolled around, and she didn't say a word in front of her brother. When Xiaofu stayed in the palace at night, she quietly ran to his yard to look for him, and said in a low voice, "Brother Xiaofu, take me away with you." Xiaofu was taken aback, and immediately shook his hand. "No, fourth uncle and fourth aunt won't agree. We just keep it from them," Bao Zhu said with bright eyes. "When they get to Guangzhou, there is nothing they can do if they don't agree, not to mention the second and third brothers are there." Seeing Xiaofu's hesitation, Bezu pouted and said, "We're just engaged, so you're willing to leave me alone? The sea is too dangerous, and it's your first time to go to sea, so you don't know when we will meet again." Xiaofu is also afraid that Bezu will forget himself in the capital. Among other things, he knew how many people in Beijing wanted to marry Bezu. If he hadn't had the natural advantage to strike first, he might not be able to compete with others. Xiaofu lowered his voice and said, "Don't tell little leopard about this in advance. You don't need to pack your things. When you leave Beijing, you said that you don't want to be hurt and parted, so you don't see us off. Let's leave Beijing first, and then we will meet on the road." Based on the analysis of the previous situation, their guards listened to them, and their hidden guards would not interfere unless their lives were in danger, so they should be able to leave Beijing safely. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1445. Chi dragged his daughter out from under the caravan. He stared at the orb for a while, but finally he couldn't hold it back. He slapped her ass a few times and said angrily, "Where do you have the guts, little girl?" The girl's family dared to run away from home. Bezu was taken aback, her face turned pale with fright, and she dared not run away. Mu Yangling stood aside with a cold face, watching his daughter being beaten. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Beat twice more, so that they don't lose their memory." Mu Yangling turned back and looked at Xiao Beizai and Xiao Fu coldly, and said with a sneer, "Why, you can't afford the trip, or do you not want to go to sea?" Hearing this, the little leopard immediately pulled Xiaofu to lead the horse. Seeing him standing still, he hurriedly leaned into his ear and said, "With my father here, Bezu will be fine." It's good for my father to beat her now, otherwise mother will only be more ruthless if she strikes. Xiaofu could only get on the horse and leave with one step at a time. Beizu watched the two leave with the guards tearfully, and stood aside with her head drooping, not daring to move. She knew that if she was not caught, her parents would at most be angry in private. Energy. But this time he was caught. Chi Heiran was really mad with anger. It's fine for his sons to be naughty, they are boys after all, with guards and hidden guards around them, so there is a limit to what can happen. But this is a girl. Moreover, this girl is more courageous than her sons. Her brothers ran away from home, at least they were still in Daki territory. Fortunately, she went overseas directly. In the presence of a large crowd, Chi Heiran failed to teach her a lesson by pulling her ears, and after spanking her twice, he turned around and left, saying in a cold voice, "Go home." Beizu can only climb up the pony to keep up, and the caravan implicated by her can only return to Beijing tremblingly. Chi Heiran rode his horse back to the palace. Half of his anger subsided first, but when he thought of what his daughter had done, he straightened his face immediately, and carried her to the ancestral hall to kneel. "Just kneel here, think about yourself, where is the mistake?" Beizu straightened her back and knelt, and said aggrievedly, "Brothers have also run away from home, I don't see how long you have been angry. At most, a beating would be an afterthought." Chi Heiran was very sad, looked at the top of his daughter's head and was silent for a while, and finally he simply lifted up his robe and sat beside her, saying, "Then, have you ever thought about me and your mother?" Beizu still knelt in anger. She had planned to go to sea with Xiaofu, but now everything was over. "You guys are so light, you leave as soon as you say, and the sea and the sky let you fly, don't you?" Chi Heiran sneered. "Do you know how worried we parents are?" Beizu still straightened her back, but lowered her head guiltily. "It's okay for your brothers, at least they are still in Daki. Their identities are there. Even if they are in danger, they can ask for help, but what about you?" Chi Heiran became more and more angry. "You want to run away without saying a word, going overseas. Do you know what is the most dangerous thing at sea? It's a storm, it's a disease." Chi Heiran blushed angrily. "Do you know how many people die innocently at sea every year? If it weren't for your fourth brother and Xiaofu insisting on going overseas and making a fuss in Beijing, you think I let them go?" Chi Heiran stood up, looked down at his daughter and said, "You have started to learn filial piety before you can read, so now, how much do you care about your parents?" Beizu's eye circles were red, she pursed her mouth and said nothing. Chi Heiran turned around and left. When he saw his wife standing at the gate of the courtyard, his expression eased, and he stepped forward to embrace her and said, "Go back, let her think about it for herself." Mu Yangling glanced at his daughter kneeling in front of the ancestral hall. His eyes were a little red, but he still turned around and left with Chi Heiran. Beizu wanted to go to sea, so she mentioned it openly to her. Even if she disagreed this time, if she still wanted to go to sea after Xiaofu and the others returned safely, even if Chi Heiran disagreed, she would try her best to persuade her. A woman's world is not limited to the inner house and common affairs, they can have a vast world, and her daughter has the right time, place and people, but this does not mean that she is willing to let her go to sea rashly. At the very least, we have to wait for Little Leopard and Xiaofu to come back safely. Those two children also risked 50% of their lives when they went to sea. How dare she let so many children on board at once? What made her sad was that none of the three children thought about their parents. The son travels thousands of miles and the mother is worried that the parents are here, and the poems such as "Not Traveling Far" are what they have learned since childhood. In the end, they are too big-hearted to hold their parents. Mu Yangling was heartbroken, and naturally made her daughter kneel down very firmly. It was also a warning to other children. There are some things that can be done, but there are some things that must not be done. This time, it would be fine for Beizu to go to Guangzhou or other places in Daki, but he was so courageous that he wanted to go to see. Bezo pursed her lips and knelt on the ground, tears streaming down her face. Seeing that it was almost noon and no one woke her up, she knew her parents were very angry. Because her father doted on her, she had never been beaten since she was a child, let alone kneeling in the ancestral hall. She would kneel outside the study for a quarter of an hour at most, and often someone came to help her into the house shortly after she knelt down. Bezo was thinking wildly, and she came back to her senses when her arm was supported by someone. She turned her head to look at the person with tears all over her face. "Wake me up." Lishun was angry and funny at the same time, nodded her forehead and said, "Silly boy, seeing your face full of tears, I thought you had changed. Who knows or doesn't know where I went wrong? Why do you think the prince punished you? It's not because you don't understand your parents. I saw you crying so sadly just now, and thought I understood. Listening to you now, it shows that you still don't know what filial piety is." Bezo stared blankly at Lishun. Lishun is the big girl next to Mu Yangling. She has never been married, and she stayed with Mu Yangling by herself a few years ago, so the children of the palace respect her very much. Because in many cases, she is not speaking for herself, but for Mu Yangling. At this time, she used this tone to communicate with Bezu, more naturally representing Mu Yangling. The prince and concubine are not sad because you disobeyed them and left without permission, but because you put yourself in an extremely dangerous situation. You hurt your body, but your parents hurt their hearts. Lishun sighed. The prince and you, the older brothers, have all done things like running away from home, but except for the prince when the incident was a bit more serious, which time have you seen the prince and princess not be beaten? That's because although it is dangerous for the sons to run away from home, it is not too dangerous. But when you go out to sea, natural disasters and man-made disasters, let alone princes and concubines, even if Daki's national power is controllable, if a storm comes, can the princes and the others stop it for you? At the end of the day, the prince and concubine are also sad because you hurt yourself. This is really unfilial, Lichun said. If the princess has knelt for a long time and still doesn't understand, it's better to kneel for a while longer. Bezo knelt on the ground in deep thought, and asked after a while, "Did mother ask Aunt Lishun to come? Why didn't she come? Your father is angry. He is holding the wine jar to drink. The princess can't do without him, and he is worried that you will burn your body, so he asked the servant to persuade you." Lishun bent down and asked respectfully, "So, the princess, have you figured it out? Do you want to get up?" Bezo wiped away tears, got up and said, "I'll go and confess my mistake to Daddy. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1446. Chi Heiran was really angry this time. Seeing his daughter coming in with her head bowed, he only glanced at her and continued to sit with a sullen face. Bezo knelt down towards her parents with red eyes, and said in a low voice, "Father, Mother, I know I was wrong." Chi Heiran snorted coldly and ignored her. Mu Yangling watched the father and daughter quarrel and quarreled, thinking of the children's audacity. He also remained silent. Bezo felt a little uneasy in her heart, and said in a low voice, "Why don't you beat me up?" "Who wants to beat Bezo?" As soon as Bezo finished speaking, Xiao Xiang rushed in from the outside. Seeing his sister kneeling on the ground, he was taken aback, and asked blankly, "What's wrong?" Seeing his son, Chi Heiran immediately vented his anger, jumped up and pointed at his son's nose and scolded, "You still have the face to ask, why don't you guys behave without scruples and teach your younger brothers and sisters to the ground?" Little Bear was stunned. He had no idea what he had done wrong. Little Xiang has been in the barracks all this time, and rushed back when he heard that his younger brothers were going to sea. As a result, last night he held up wine for Little Leopard and Little Fu, accidentally drank too much, and couldn't get up in the morning. When he came up, he ran to find his parents. He was a little sad for not being able to send his younger brothers out of the city, and he was also afraid that his father would beat him, so he rushed to make jokes. Who knew that he saw the family's baby, Liao, kneeling on the ground. Chi Heiran continued to point at his nose and cursed, "How old are you? You can't grow your brain, your younger brothers are leaving, why don't you bid farewell to your family, what kind of friends are you inviting? Hurry to block the wine for them, do you know that they intend to get the family drunk on purpose, do you know that they want us to relax and take the orb aboard? Linen Mansion is near the sea, and horse racing can reach the port in 2 days. Today is a day, and Beizu is locked in the house in the name of being sad." Knowing that she has a good relationship with the little leopard Xiaofu, neither Mu Yangling nor Chi Heiran will bother her. At most, people can send her more food to heal the sadness of parting. In this way, when the family finds out that Beizu is not there, they will send pursuers to chase after them. They will have already boarded the ship at the port. Because the 2 children belonged to the emperor's family, they were sent to the west on behalf of Daki, not only for the sake of national prestige, but also for safety. The sea ships dispatched were the most stable and fastest in Daki at present. When they reached the sea, they couldn't catch up with them at all, so they had to hurry up and let the ports below intercept them. However, a few brats can change the course, and they won't be able to stop them at all. Moreover, the ministers of the DPRK and China have complained a lot about the mission to the west, and now there is an incident of intercepting the sea ship because of Beizu, and all those who support the mission will be attacked. They are relatives of the emperor, no matter how bad they are, but other courtiers may be dismissed from office and questioned because of this matter. In short, this matter can be big or small. If it is small, it is a family matter of their Chi family and Fan family, if it is big, it is a state matter. Although Chi Heiran spanked his daughter a few times, she was a pampered daughter after all, and she was not willing to beat her hard. Seeing his rough-skinned and thick-skinned son at this time, his anger burst out immediately. He pointed at his son and scolded him, then searched left and right, finally tore off a branch from the nearby tree, and raised his hand to beat him. The little bear didn't dare to run away, so he stood up and was beaten up by his father. Chi Heiran took the branch and hit him several times. He felt sorry for his son, and was afraid that he would be damaged if he didn't have a heavy hand, so he threw away the branch and waved his palm to fight in person. Beizu was dumbfounded, and when she saw her elder brother being held down and spanked, she burst into tears with a wow, rushed forward and hugged her father's leg and said, "Father, father, I know I was wrong, don't hit elder brother, yes my fault, I don't know about my departure, we were the ones who made everyone drink on purpose last night. Last night, not only the little bear was drunk, but the prince who came to deliver the letter, Xiaoan, Chi Heiran and several other adults were also drunk. The purpose was to make them confused after drinking, so that they could relax their vigilance the next day. It's just that Chi Heiran has a good capacity for alcohol, the children drink as much as they want and get up as usual the next day, while Fan Zijian is sober and rational, although he also drank, and he was very restrained. Mu Yangling's sadness caused the children to drink a lot, and her head hurts even now, but if it wasn't for her headache, she wouldn't suddenly become so sad after seeing the children get on the horse, and neither would Chi Heiran. He will hold her in his arms lovingly. At that time, she was leaning on Chi Heiran's shoulder, with her face facing Zou's back. She quietly reached out to touch her tears, and when her vision became clear, she immediately saw the orb mixed in the caravan. That was her daughter. She had raised her for 13 years, a wit and courageous daughter, let alone a simple disguise, she knew even if she turned into ashes. Thus, the orb was discovered. At this time, Beizu saw that her elder brother not only blocked the wine for them and got drunk, but even got beaten for her. She felt guilty all of a sudden, hugged her father's thigh and cried loudly, and cried out in fear and guilt, "Daddy, you stop hitting, I really know I was wrong." Hearing this, Chi Heiran beat him even harder, and scolded his son while beating, "Look at how well behaved your sister is, she has been spoiled by your scolding. If you hadn't been naughty and mischievous since childhood and set a bad example, she would have thought about leaving, run away from home and go to sea. Aside from playing all day long, I made troubles, and I forgot to teach my younger siblings well." Mu Yangling heard Chi-Heiran angering the little bear like this, coughed lightly, and the strings in Chi-Heiran's mind were picked up. He glanced at his son, who was honestly let him beat him, snorted coldly, let him go, and said, "You two don't eat today, just go to the study and copy the book of filial piety 10 times, and when you finish copying, you will eat." Little Xiong immediately helped up his sister, who was out of breath from crying, and evacuated quickly, for fear that his father would change his mind. As soon as the children left, Chi-Heiran immediately accused Mu Yangling, "I'm teaching my son, why are you meddling?" Mu Yangling immediately apologized, "Aren't I afraid that your hand hurts from the beating? It's okay for me to tear myself apart, but you're afraid of spanking twice? You dote on your son just by doting on him. Don't make excuses. You're such a loving mother who loses so much thinking of her daughter crying like that," she said dissatisfiedly. "You shouldn't be spoiled, Chong, don't punish those who should be punished. Seeing Beza crying like that, won't you say a word of comfort?" Mu Yangling was a little speechless. The two reached an agreement on the children's education shortly after giving birth to the cub. They can pamper and bicker at ordinary times, but when it comes to punishment for children's mistakes, one party is punishing the children, when the other party must not intervene to stop. But this time, Little Bear really didn't have much responsibility, just beat him up. How could he beat him hard? But Mu Yangling didn't refute Chi-Heiran face to face, let alone beg for mercy, just coughed lightly to let him regain his sanity. But the girl did make a big mistake. Don't say she is just crying now, she was really beaten by Chi-Heiran. She won't even say kiss. That child deserves a beating, right? But she knew that Chi-Heiran was just making trouble for no reason, so she let him in. Anyway, he would apologize to her in the evening, and she felt wronged. But Beizu, who walked out of the yard, felt ashamed of her eldest brother, wiped half of her tears, and asked him with red eyes, "Brother, does it hurt you?" Little Xiong couldn't help but rolled his eyes, and said, "Don't you understand, my father? Thunder is loud and rain is light, and it's not a board. How painful can spanking with the palm of your hand be? I was injured when I competed with others in the school field. Much heavier than that." Bao Zhu felt relieved, then she was even more ashamed, wiped her eyes and said, "Father loves us so much, I really hurt Daddy this time, what should I do?" The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1447. Little Xiong scratched his head and thought about it for a long time, but in the end he couldn't come up with any good solution, so he could only say, "Why don't you be nice these days? Your parents love you so much, they won't be willing to punish you." Beza drooped her head and said, "I would rather they punish me, that way I feel better." Little Xiong patted his sister's little shoulder sympathetically, and suggested, "Why don't you punish yourself? This way it will appear that you have a better attitude of admitting your mistakes. My father loves my sister so much, so he definitely can't bear her suffering, so in the end, this matter is not settled." Seeing that the eldest brother said with certainty, Beza couldn't help but her eyes lit up, and asked, "Then what should I punish myself for?" Little Xiong tilted his head and thought for a while, then said, "Why don't you copy the book of filial piety a few more times, or directly ask for guilt?" Beza turned around and left. She might as well think carefully. Little Xiong scratched his head, and also felt that he was a little stupid. He planned to ask the prince for advice after copying the book of filial piety. Nor will it be implicated. After Beza finished copying the book of filial piety, she leaned on the table with her chin propped up, and the girl next to her came in with a bowl of noodles, and coaxed, "Princess, eat some, otherwise the prince and concubine should worry when they know." She moved her head to the other side, turned her back directly to the girl, and said softly, "It's fine if you don't tell them." The girl looked at the master helplessly. "Then you can't spend the night hungry, you haven't eaten all day." Bezu was troubled and irritable in her heart, thinking for a while that she had really hurt her parents, and for a while thinking that the fourth brother and brother Ziofa must have arrived somewhere. They might arrive at the port tomorrow, and they would be able to board the ship and go to sea the next day. She didn't know why in her heart, but she became disgusted with herself. If she was a man like her brothers, would she also be able to go to sea like the fourth brother, and stationed at sea like the second and third brothers, and expand the territory for me? The girl didn't know what the little master was thinking, but when she saw tears in her eyes, she knew she was wronged, and she didn't know how to persuade her. When Mu Yangling entered the door, she saw that the daughter was lying on the table sadly, and the girl was surrounding her anxiously, so she couldn't help but take 2 quick steps forward. Seeing that the princess was relieved, the girl hurriedly saluted and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, the princess has refused to eat until now." Bezu hurriedly wiped away her tears and stood up. Hearing the words, she said angrily, "Mother, don't listen to her nonsense, I ate some snacks." "Okay, leave your face, you all stand back." The girl let out a sigh of relief, hurriedly led the people back quietly, and then closed the door for them. Mu Yangling reached out to wipe his daughter's tears, and said, "You have always had a big appetite, what are those snacks worth? Hurry up and eat the noodles, and my mother will sleep with you today." Bezu pouted, "Mother, you don't need to look at me specially, I told you that if you know you made a mistake, you won't run away again, you should go back to accompany father." "Do you think mother is looking at you?" Mu Yangling nodded her forehead and said with a smile, "Silly boy, mother has something to tell you. After all, our mother and daughter haven't slept together for a long time." Then Bezu smiled happily, quickly ate the noodles, hugged her mother's arm and went back to the yard. The mother and daughter washed up and lay side by side on the bed. Mu Yangling turned to look at her daughter and asked, "I saw you sad because we didn't let you go out to sea." Bezu lowered her eyes and hesitated to speak. Mu Yangling stroked her satin-like hair. "The family is on their way, one is the avenue that parents have set up for their children, and the other is full of thorns, but that road is wider and farther, although it is full of unknowns. There are many dangers, but they are also full of opportunities. If you take the second road, you may reach heaven earlier than the first road, but you may also fall on the road." Fearless children are naturally more inclined to choose the second route, because looking at their parents, they can already guess the difficulties and scenery they will encounter on the first road, which is really boring. Mu Yangling sighing, "More parents will pressure their children to choose one, but your father and I feel that your life should be decided by you, especially after you have a certain ability to think and distinguish. Because that's your life." Bezu was shocked in her heart, and looked at her mother with piercing eyes. "But no matter how open-minded and optimistic I am, I will not let my children rush to the same thorny road, knowing that they may be injured or even die on the road." Mu Yangling stroked her daughter's hair, said, "You should be selfish as a mother. If you want to go to sea, you will always have a chance in the future, but it must not be this time. If your fourth brother and brother Ziofa can come back safely this time, if you still want to go to sea with them, I will definitely not stop you." Bezu couldn't help but grabbed her mother's hand and asked, "Can I go to sea too? Even if I'm a girl?" Mu Yangling frowned, "What does going to sea have to do with you being a girl?" Bezu looked at her mother for a while, then shook her head and said, "No, it doesn't matter." She lay on her mother's chest, stretched out her arms to hug her. Her eyes were hot and wet. "I was wrong." Mu Yangling patted her on the back, comforted her and said, "Your father is very angry this time, and I will continue to apologize to him tomorrow, understand?" Bezu nodded slightly. "Don't always focus on the matter of going to sea. There are still many things you can do. Among other things, the goods you want to bring to the sea belong to your business. Whether you make a profit or lose money, you guys are conceded. Your brothers don't have the ability to make money. Since you are in charge of the account books, you should think more. At least you have to guarantee your own business. Mu Yangling said, Da Qi will not pay for the expenses of your going to sea. This time, Da Qi's credentials are still on board, and the Ministry of Household Affairs has not allocated a penny, so if you want to go to sea, you have to make money yourself. Isn't the sea trade only making money and not losing money? Baozu looked up at her mother slightly with doubts in her eyes. When I go shopping in Western shops, I often hear them talking, saying that as long as it is imported, it can make money. Silly boy, benefits and risks are always directly proportional. How can there be a business that only makes money but not loses? Mu Yangling looked at his daughter amusedly. In addition to the risks such as storms, pirates, and patience, the goods from the West have their own risks with all kinds of dangers. If the pickers have bad eyesight and pick up some things that the people of Daki don't use, do you think they can be sold? Beza thought about it carefully, then shook her head and said, if you think about it this way, the sea trade is still quite risky. The ship capsizes, the goods are flooded, and maybe the maritime merchants are about to go bankrupt. That's why the folks say that maritime trade is making huge profits, and they only make money but not lose money, because what they see are only seagoing ships that have returned safely. Do you know how many sunken ships and innocent souls were buried, let alone how many people in Daki went bankrupt because of these sunken ships? None of your older brothers know how to run a business. In the end, their capital may be put into it for some dividends. In the end, the sea trade will have to be managed by you or Zioan. Ziofu Mu Yangling said, but your brother Zioan is the only one with high ambitions. If you are far away, you may not be interested in business matters, and Ziofu, his future is not far behind, so I am afraid that this business matter will have to be handed over to you in the future. I wonder if you are interested? Beizu asked with piercing eyes. Mother, if I take care of business affairs, can I go to patrol wherever I want? Mu Yangling twitched the corner of his mouth, and nodded after thinking for a moment. You are the boss, of course you are the one who decides. Beizu's eyes immediately brightened. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1448. Beizu is determined to make a career, and more importantly, she wants to fly freely in the sky like her brothers, so she starts to study harder. After all, Chi Heiran loved his daughter. Seeing that she not only stayed at home and read books obediently, but also expressed her repentance obediently, most of his anger disappeared, and the rest were all transferred to Xiao Beizai and Xiao Fu. He felt that his daughter was so well behaved and obedient, all of which were taught badly by those two brats. Mu Yangling tried to correct his erroneous thinking, thinking that Beizu and the little leopard Ziofu had the same responsibility for this matter. But Chi Heiran was stubborn and very stubborn. Mu Yangling thought that the little leopard Ziofu was not there anyway, and it was impossible for him to write a letter to disturb their minds regarding the responsibility for this matter, so she simply let go. However, Chi Heiran was strictly ordered not to spread this erroneous idea, so as not to habitually push Beizu to Ziofu and Zio Beizai after causing trouble in the future. Chi Heiran said disapprovingly, is our Beizu the kind of person who shirks responsibility? Besides, she is well behaved and won't cause trouble. Mu Yangling sneered, so this time, Ziofu, the little leopard, forced her to pretend to go out of the city with a knife, trying to get on a ship. Chi Heiran, let me tell you, if you spoil the child, you will take care of Beizu in the future. If I don't handle it for you, you can face the children's tears alone, especially the tears of Beizu after getting into trouble. Chi Heiran didn't dare to speak immediately, and glanced at his wife several times with guilt. Seeing that he was suppressed, Mu Yangling snorted coldly and turned around to leave. I can't cure you anymore. Chi Heiran was afraid that his daughter would cause trouble again, so he began to pay attention to her in every possible way. Anyway, he has few official duties now, and he is a half-timer with a lot of time. But Beizu hardly took the initiative to cause trouble. She seemed to be interested in business all of a sudden. Apart from learning the 6 arts and various cultural knowledge, she spent almost all her time on business. Mu Yangling first asked her to manage several farms at home, then asked her to manage the glass workshop, and then started to manage the sea trade. When Xiaobeizai and Xiaofu came back after their mission to the west, Beizu was able to manage the glass workshop independently, and Haimao naturally knew 7 points. Little Leopard and Little Fu traveled westward, and when they encountered countries along the way, they would stop to submit credentials and express the Daki royal family's friendly attitude towards each country. After arriving in Europe, they stayed there for half a year, so when they came back, they were 3 years later. If it hadn't only taken them 4 months to return, it might have been longer. They brought millions of dollars worth of Daki local specialties out, and naturally brought back valuable commodities. In addition to the gemstones and spices that Daki people love, there are also local specialties from various places and national gifts from various countries. 2 of the boats were full of seeds and some grains of various crops they had collected. They knew it was important, and it was Mu Yangling who asked for it, so other ships docked at Guangzhou port to rest, but they immediately took these 2 ships to Linen. The 2 teenagers were very excited when they returned to their hometown after 3 years, so as soon as the boat docked, they couldn't wait to go ashore. After getting off the boat, the first thing Xiaofu saw was Beizu standing on the shore in a bright yellow riding outfit, with a whip in his hand, standing gracefully on the shore. Not seeing each other for 3 years, the pretty and cute little girl back then has become a beautiful lady, and Xiaofu just stood there blankly at the desk. Seeing Xiaofu's stubble-covered brother, Beizu couldn't help but pursed his lips into a smile. The dimples on his face were faintly visible, making Xiaofu's heart beat violently, and he couldn't move even more. The little leopard didn't understand the psychology of a good brother. When he saw his sister, he let out a strange cry, rushed up to hug her, and laughed excitedly. Beizu, Beizu, brother is back home, ha ha ha. Beizu was also very happy. She didn't dislike the fishy smell on her brother's body at all, hugged him back, and said with a happy smile, "You are finally back." Xiaofu walked forward with one hand and one foot, stood aside and looked at them with a smile on his lips. The little leopard glanced at him, stretched out his hand and gave him a hammer, and shouted, "Why did you become more reserved when you got home? Who was that screaming on the boat just now?" Xiaofu blushed, and explained softly to Beizu, "I'm so excited to go back to my hometown." Beizu also pursed her lips and smiled back, nodding her head gently and said, "I know." Little leopard got goosebumps all over his arms. He couldn't stand the 2 of them, so he simply pushed them into a pile with each hand, and said, "Come on, I know you are an unmarried couple. I haven't seen you for many years and I have many heartfelt complaints. I won't bother you anymore." After saying that, he shook his hand and ran away. Beizu and Xiaofu all blushed when they collided together. Beizu quickly pushed Xiaofu away to avoid it, but Xiaofu reflexively hugged him in his arms. Seeing their master being embraced by young Master Biao, all the servants lowered their heads subconsciously, only staring at their own toes, but their ears were pricked up. Beizu was held in Xiaofu's arms, her face turned even redder. Xiaofu coughed lightly, let go of her and said, "Little leopard is used to messing around." Seeing her lowering her head, Xiaofu couldn't help asking softly, "How are you recently?" Although the 2 of them communicated from time to time, across the sea and thousands of mountains, they could always communicate 2 or 3 times a year, but both parties reported good news rather than bad news, and at most wrote anecdotes about life and customs. But Xiaofu knew, how could there be no difficulties in life? Hearing that she is now managing the property of the palace for the fourth aunt, it will only be more disturbing. Bezu also really wanted to ask Ziofa this question, but she noticed that the people on the port were always looking at them intentionally or unintentionally, so she took his hand and walked towards the carriage, and said in a low voice, "Let's talk in the carriage." She is not in the habit of being visited by people. But Ziofa didn't hear what she was saying, and all the feeling of his body and mind was concentrated on the palm of the hand being held. Bezu still didn't know it. Through the collision just now, the strangeness of the past 3 years dissipated a lot, and she resumed the posture of the little girl in front of Ziofu, muttering in a low voice, "If people are watching, you won't know the news the next day." "What are you talking about?" "The folk customs in Daki are open, so Bezu came to pick up people as soon as she rode a horse, not to mention the curtains, she didn't even bring the curtains." However, the missions returned from Daki's mission were received by officials in Guangzhou, not related to officials in Zhejiang, but everyone knows that there are important people on the 2 ships that have taken refuge today, so there are also many officials and their family members waiting at the port. Wait and see. Ziofa came back to his senses after getting in the car, quickly opened the curtains, looked out. "Where's little leopard? Fourth brother must be entangled by those officials." Bezu also looked out from the other side, looked out for a moment and said, "Forget it, let's go back to the inn to wait for him. I brought a lot of stewards, and they will take over the cargo on the ship. Take care, you don't have to worry." Xiaofu was stunned for a moment, and asked, "Then you don't need to leave the scheduling? It's all handed over to the chief steward, and they will dispatch it themselves. I'm here to pick you up and return to Beijing, not to order some goods." Xiaofu looked his fiancée up and down, smiled lightly, and said, "Our orbs are so powerful. Delegating power to subordinates is undoubtedly the highest level of management at present." Xiaofu did not expect that Baozu would have a big manager under his command at this time. But Bezu's face turned red, and she said in a low voice, "The steward was given to me by my mother." "But you can instruct and control him, can't you?" Ziofa said with a smile, "that alone is very powerful." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1449. Bezu still wants to go to sea with her brothers, but she is no longer the reckless little girl she was 3 years ago. She knew that if she wanted to travel around the world and travel through thousands of mountains and rivers, in addition to obtaining the consent of her family, she had to be capable herself. The ability to earn enough money to travel, the ability to protect and survive when times are tough. So in the past 2 years, she not only took care of everyone's sea trade business, but also managed the private property that her mother gave her in an orderly manner. She wants to see the famous mountains and great rivers, to appreciate the scenery of various countries, but her intention is not to go to sea at once. What she enjoys more is the charm of nature and spiritual satisfaction. My mother said that this is also a kind of quality of life, just like eating, drinking, clothing, and housing. And if you want to travel comfortably, you should rely on your own hands to support it, just like dealing with the needs of survival such as food, drink, clothing, and housing. Traveling in the mountains and rivers is a matter of emotion. If you are frightened and starved of food, you will not lose your interest, but put the cart before the horse. So when she learned that the fourth brother and Ziofa were going to go to India soon, Bezu went to the kitchen to roast a plate of meat and brought it to her parents anxiously. She is not good at cooking, except for stewing, she can only cook barbecue. When Chi Heiran saw the royal on the plate, he thought that his daughter was specially filial to him, so he happily turned his head and said to Mu Yangling, "It's still Bezu who loves the Lord, and knows how to make a tooth sacrifice for the Lord." When Dr. Wang asked Chi Heiran for his ping and pulse, he implicitly suggested that he should eat more vegetables and fruits. Although Imperial Physician Wang didn't point out the next sentence, Mu Yangling completed it automatically. He ordered the kitchen to prepare more vegetarian food, and the meat food was directly reduced by half. Not only has the variety decreased, but the quantity has also decreased. A plate of braised pork is only as small as the bottom of the plate, and a chicken is served with only half of it. The key is that little bear still goes home from time to time to grab food from him, and his son can go out for a tooth sacrifice. Ever since Dr. Wang implicitly stated that he should eat less wine and meat, Aling has followed him every step of the way. So now this plate of meat is almost like gold in Chi Heiran's eyes. Chi Heiran took the plate, took the sauce, rolled up his sleeves, and dipped a piece of venison into the sauce to eat. Seeing that there was a thin pancake on the small plate beside him, he hurriedly used it to roll the meat and ate it. It took less than a quarter of an hour, just wiped out a plate of meat and bread. Mu Yangling sat and watched all the time, neither stopping him nor getting angry. Seeing that he was eating anxiously, he poured him a glass of water, patted his back lightly and said, "Don't worry, I won't rob you." Chi Heiran finished eating contentedly, touched his stomach and said regretfully, "It's just that there is a little less meat." Seeing that he had finished eating, Mu Yangling turned to his daughter with a smile, "Tell me, what do you need from your father?" Beizhu bowed her head in embarrassment. Chi Heiran blinked, and after a while, he pretended to wave his hand grandly, and said, "It's okay, my daughter has something to ask her father, and everything that father can do will definitely be done for you." Beizhu looked at her mother, then at her father, and finally summoned up her courage and said, "Father, you said that as long as I am sensible and capable, you will let me go to sea." Chi Heiran turned his head and asked Mu Yangling, "Did you say that?" Beizhu pouted, "You can't deny it, you said it yourself back then, as long as I'm justified, you'll agree to me." Chi Heiran opened his mouth to deny it, but Mu Yangling cut him off and asked, "Do you want to go to sea?" Beizhu nodded fiercely, looked at her bluntly and said, "Mother, the place where the fourth brother and the others are going this time is not far away, it is only in India, and it is only a few days away from where the second and third brothers are stationed." Mu Yangling thought for a while and said, "Okay, we agree, but you have to convince Uncle Huang and Uncle Fan by yourself." Beizhu immediately made a bitter face, "Why do you want to persuade Uncle Huang and Uncle Fan? Your fourth brother and the others represent Daki as an envoy this time, and you, a princess conferred by the imperial court, will follow, of course, with your uncle's consent," Mu Yangling said, "and you and Xiaofu are already engaged, which is equivalent to being a fan. The family is half a daughter-in-law, and such a big event as going to sea must be explained to your husband's family, and your father and I don't care about this matter, and you have the ability to persuade them to let you go on the merchant ship." Chi Heiran was no longer in a hurry, but rolled his eyes and nodded in agreement, "Your mother is right. Don't think about sneaking onto the boat like you did 3 years ago," Mu Yangling threatened. "If you dare to act like this, I can lock you up in the capital for the rest of your life." Beizhu walked out with her head drooping. As soon as the daughter left, Chi Heiran immediately turned around and looked at his wife suspiciously, frowned and asked, "Are you helping her?" Mu Yangling said lightly, "She is 16, and she will be married in 2 or 3 years. How long can you control her?" Chi Heiran frowned. "Instead of waiting for her to marry Xiaofu and rush overseas in a hurry, it is better to satisfy her wish at this time, so as to prevent her from having conflicts with Zijin Xiaoxia as soon as she passes the door," Mu Yangling said, "and this time the timing is really good. Yes, India is not far from Daki. With the protection of my Daki navy along the way, the safety has been directly improved by 50%, and the time is still short. Even if they want to go to the Indian royal family to have an audience, 1 year is enough for them to go back and forth gone. A few years ago, the tiger head and the little lion took root in Nanyang, and in the past 2 years, after half a year in Hanlin, Xiaoan also invested heavily in the development of Nanyang. Now Tiger Head and Little Lion are in charge of Nanyang's military affairs, while Xiaoan is in charge of all foreign affairs of Daki in Nanyang. The 3 of them work together sincerely, not only supporting the aborigines of Nanyang countries to fight against the Westerners, but also doing business with the Westerners in full swing. Xiaoan is well aware of the importance of balance, and usually ignores the disputes between the Aborigines and the Westerners, but always secretly supports the Aborigines at critical moments. The reason why Xiaofu and Xiaobeizai want to go to India this time is also related to them. The three of them expanded their territory a lot, and they inevitably had some conflicts with the English who occupied the Indian coast. Although the two sides did not fight, there have been many recent peace talks. For this kind of matter, the Ministry of Rights and the Lifen Academy have been able to deal with it calmly, and they don't need to send anyone, just send a letter to Xiaoan in Nanyang, and he can handle it with full authority. And the people in India secretly contacted Xiaoan at this time, hoping that he could help the Indian people drive the Westerners out of the Indian coast. Of course, there are many benefits, except for gold, silver, and jewels. They are willing to share half of Xiaoan in the recaptured port. Xiaoan was surprised, so he went to check and found out that the other party did not represent the Indian imperial court, or that they did not represent the Indian royal family, but officials and gentry near the coast. Like Emperor Jinjian of the Great Zhou dynasty, the Indian royal family did not pay much attention to sea trade, so although a lot of the coast was taken away, they also sent troops to attack, but seeing the heavy losses, they gradually stopped the war, as if the sea was taken away. The coasts, ports, and estates do not belong to their country in general. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1450. But the local officials and gentry couldn't bear it, because what the Westerners took was their manors and lands, and what they violated was their interests. Therefore, they have been organizing the people to resist the invaders without stopping, but the effect is not great because they lack weapons. Especially when the opponent had muskets and cannons, they suffered heavy losses. In the past few years, Daki's influence in Nanyang has been growing, and the fact that they have stood up for the people of Nanyang countries has also been quietly spread in private, so they have the courage to contact the court behind their backs. Xiaoan didn't want to rebel, nor was he short of money, so he naturally wouldn't contact them in private. Even if he agreed to support the Indians, that should also be a fair and above-board contact with the Indian court and royal family. But he didn't want to send troops to help the Indians. Wouldn't that bring all the hatred on himself? Moreover, the Westerners are really going to be driven away by their Daki, and the Nanyang countries will turn to deal with them. He is very satisfied with the current situation. But there is still something to be done to express goodwill, so Xiaofu and Little Leopard, who have only returned to China for less than 3 months, are going to sea again. This time they are on behalf of Dachi, and they are only going to India. Mu Yangling agreed to let Beizo follow, because the trip was very safe. The English know that Dachi is going to India, so they definitely don't want to worsen the relationship between the two sides, because with the in-depth understanding of the two sides, England and other Westerners already know that Dachi is not a sick cat they can despise, but a fierce tiger. Secondly, she wants to fulfill her daughter's wish. Beizu is about to get married, perhaps because the concept of previous life is too deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. She is not sure whether her daughter will be bound by the family after marriage. She hopes that she can go out for a walk before marriage, as a wish fulfilled. Thirdly, she wanted her daughter to know that going to sea was not so easy. Mu Yangling has traveled to sea with Chi Heiran several times, but the one that left the deepest impression was the time when he rescued Fan Zijian. The dark and low cabins are not only convenient, but it is difficult to eat and bathe. On the boat, for a few days, a dozen days, or even a month, half a year, all you can see is the endless sea, and the scenery is so monotonous. Nausea. Occasionally stop for supplies, and will not stay for too long, unless you encounter a large port. If your daughter is just excited and purely fantasizing about the romance and beauty of the sea, then she should put away her thoughts as soon as possible and retreat in spite of the difficulties. And the journey to India is neither long nor short, just right. What's more, after landing, they have to go overland to meet the Indian royal family. Although Chihayran was worried about his daughter's safety, as Aling said, he couldn't control his daughter for the rest of his life. After thinking about it, he nodded in agreement, and he said optimistically, with Little Leopard and Xiaofu around, she won't suffer too much. But the fact is that Beza vomited as soon as he got on the boat, and he tossed himself hard enough. She convinced everyone, and excitedly followed them onto the sea boat. When the boat first started, she excitedly grabbed Xiaofu's hand, and directly pinched his hand several times. As a result, the boat sailed for half a day, and as soon as the excitement passed, she felt dizzy and nauseous, and then began to vomit. Xiaofu and Xiaobeizai looked at her sympathetically, and said, "Is it uncomfortable? It's okay, just hang around for a couple of days and it will be fine. It's the same for our first boat ride." Beiza's face turned blue, and she asked, "Is there no cure?" Xiaofu said, "You can take medicine, but it's not good for your health, and you'll get dizzy once you stop taking the medicine. We'll be on the sea for a long time, so we can't take medicine all the time, right?" Only then did Beizu understand what her mother said was not easy. The little leopard stretched out his hand to touch his sister's forehead, and thankfully said, "It's just vomiting, thankfully I don't have a fever." He comforted, "It's okay, just throw up and it'll be fine." Xiaofu held her hand and said, "The first 3 days are the most important thing, you must not vomit and collapse, or your body will not be able to bear it anymore. I will ask someone to cook some porridge for you in a while, and eat some with pickles. In short, you must not let your body lose any more." The little leopard also nodded repeatedly, "That's right, many people can't get over it just because they vomit and can't eat." Xiaofu's face darkened, and he couldn't help but glared at Xiaobeizai. Only then did the little leopard realize that he had said the wrong thing, so he quickly covered his mouth, leaving only a pair of eyes rolling around. Beizu was still sad at first, but she couldn't help being happy when she saw this. "I heard it all, what's the use of covering it up?" Thinking of her parents' worried expressions before leaving, she straightened her face and said, "Don't worry, I will protect myself." She knows that she can't let her family worry about herself, and this is her dream. How can she be knocked down as soon as she comes up? Even if Beizu lost her appetite, she would try to swallow the porridge and side dishes as much as possible, and ask the girls and women on the boat to tell her some interesting things, and try to ignore the nausea in her heart. Xiaofu felt distressed when she saw it, so she hooked a sea fish and asked someone to take the ingredients to make fish soup for her. Skim off all the oily flours, only the milky fish soup. Xiaofu personally brought it to her. "Don't eat all the porridge, drink some soup to replenish your strength." Beizu has no appetite for meat, not even green vegetables, so she can only eat some pickled side dishes with porridge. It's fine for a day or two, and her stomach will naturally feel uncomfortable after a long time. What's more, Beizu has always had a good appetite and is a carnivore. Seeing that the soup was really hungry, Beizu took a couple of sips carefully, but found that he didn't spit it out, so he happily asked, "Brother Xiaofu, where did you get this fish?" "Fishing." Beizu was surprised, "This boat is moving, but it can still fish." Xiaofu couldn't help being happy, and said with a smile, "When you don't get seasick, I'll take you fishing. There are many fish in the sea, and there is another kind that can jump up. One is as big as a boat and appears in groups. It looks good." Baoju's eyes lit up, and said, "I heard mother talk about this fish." The little leopard who also came over with the fish soup saw their little heads touching each other, immediately curled his lips, turned around and walked to his own cabin, muttering, "Obviously I am her brother from the same mother, why are you getting closer to brother Xiaofu instead?" Then he thought that the two of them were already a fiancé couple, maybe they would get married after returning to Beijing this time, and he couldn't help sighing, "Forget it, as an uncle, it's better not to be an eyesore, being single is pitiful." The little leopard glanced at the fish soup in his hand, tilted his neck and drank it by himself, then smacked his mouth, turned around and went to the kitchen again. Since his sister didn't drink it, then he should drink it all. Anyway, she brother Xiaofu is worried. Seeing that Baozu drank the fish soup without vomiting, Xiaofu asked someone to stew a pot of fish soup and delivered it to her in person early the next morning. Seeing him walking past him with the soup without looking away, Xiaofu immediately muttered, "Pay more attention to sex than friends," shook hands, and ran to the kitchen to drink the rest of the fish soup. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1451. The trip to India was smoother than they had imagined. Although the Indian court had different attitudes in fighting against the Western invaders, and many people even believed that Dachi had evil intentions, on the bright side, India did not want to offend Dachi. And Xiaofu didn't expect to be loved by everyone, as long as India didn't harbor ill will towards Dachi. Daki's policy in Nanyang has always been to liaise with other countries to resist the Western invaders, but he knows that the Western countries have always wanted to drive the natives to fight against Daki. Although Dachi is now a hegemon in Nanyang, it is not stable. As long as Dachi is weaker or the situation is a little chaotic, the hegemony may be lost at any time. As a diplomatic envoy, his task is to make more people who have a good impression of Daki, in order to ensure the integrity of Daki and the safety of the people in the event of such accidents in the future. It was the first time for Beizo to come into contact with these things when she was with Xiaofu and Xiaobeizai. She thought that she could manage such a large property at such a young age, and she was good enough to gather so many managers. Only now did she realize that she was just a frog at the bottom of a well. In this mission, Beizo has the most noble status. She is the imperial concubine princess and the same county king. Even a woman is still treated preferentially by the Indian royal family. But Xiaofu, the chief envoy, and Xiaobeizai, the deputy envoy, didn't mean to despise the woman, so they didn't hide anything from Beizo, and even brought her with them when negotiating with Indian officials. Only then did Beizo know that the confrontation between countries was like this, and a door to a new world quietly opened in front of her. Seeing that she was interested, Xiaofu taught her with all his heart, "That's good, if I go to another country as an envoy in the future, you can follow me." Beizo's eyes became brighter. "Do you not mind me meddling in outside affairs? I like to fight side by side with you, advancing together and retreating together." Xiaofu looked at Beizo affectionately. Baozu couldn't help pursing her lips slightly when she heard the words, and stared at Xiaofu with moist eyes. There was so much affection between the two that they couldn't even pour water in, let alone the little leopard on the other side. He stared at them for a long time, his eyes were sore and no one noticed him. He hummed unhappily and left by himself. Brother turned brother-in-law doesn't feel good at all. In the beginning, he thought it would be cool for him to let brother Xiaofu call him brother, but over the years, not to mention that his wish has never been fulfilled, or even simple flattery. He only has this younger sister, and he still wants to use his identity to play off his uncle's prestige. Who knew that he met a cousin who knew everything about him and became his brother-in-law? The most important thing is that as long as these two people meet, there will always be an aura around them, which makes him always feel excluded. Obviously he is Baoju's biological brother, and obviously Xiaofu's elder brother was better with him when he was a child. Little Leopard would never admit that he was envious, he just thought that these two people were too careless about the occasion. How could they show their affection so much in public? His father and mother are so loving that they wouldn't do such a shameful thing. Although the little leopard suffered 10,000 points of damage from the two of them, he still chose to leave space for them. There's no way, who made one of them his own sister and the other his good brother? If it were someone else, he would have kicked them up and separated them. It is detrimental to the gentleness in the public. Little Leopard thought about leaving, but Xiaofu taught Bezu how to deal with foreign envoys in a serious manner. What can be said, what can never be said by one's own side, different attitudes should be taken when facing different countries, and different incidents should be handled in different ways. Xiaofu spoke clearly and logically, half of which were taught by his father and elder brother, and the other half were explored by himself. Fan Zijin and Xiaoan both gave him intensive training when they were on overseas missions, and told him almost all the problems they could think of, leaving him to adapt the rest. He also made jokes when he and the little leopard first went to sea, but in the past 3 years, they have traveled through countless countries, and seen the humble as slaves of pirates, and the noble as the king of a country. He has already accumulated a lot of money in terms of experience. He may still be far behind his talented elder brother in other matters, but in matters of diplomacy, he is confident that he can surpass his elder brother. But now there must be no more than 3 people in the Daki court who can beat him. Other men might be reluctant to talk about this with their wives, thinking that women should be at home with their husbands and children and take care of the housework, but he never thought so. Isn't the 4th aunt living happily and happily being able to fight side by side with the 4th uncle? In his view, whether it is the independent 4th aunt or the mother who lives dependent on his father, this is just their life choice, just like he chose to go to sea instead of staying in Beijing to take the imperial examination and become an official. Since the adults respected his choice, he naturally had to respect the choices of others. Bezu is willing to stay at home to handle common affairs, take care of her husband and teach her children, so he will balance his time between work and home, spend as much time as possible with her and their future children. She is more willing to go north and south with him, so he must protect her well, teach her well, so that she can stand side by side with him. Xiaofu didn't think there was anything wrong with this. Didn't 4th uncle and 4th aunt live like this all the time? At this time, Bezu didn't understand Xiaofu's thoughts. She just simply thanked him for treating her so trustingly and sincerely. She is no longer a little girl who doesn't understand anything. The more people she contacts in the past 3 years, the more she understands how difficult it is for women in this era. Because the emperor's aunt and mother opened girls' schools, the status of women in some places gradually improved, but that was also in the county towns and relatively developed towns. She knew that drowning infants was still a common phenomenon in some places in the south. Newborn baby girls, or even baby girls who have been raised for a few years, may be drowned by their family just because of difficulties at home, or even because of some rumors. No one will feel wrong, because they are girls. She is a princess, and she is the king of the county, but that is only in terms of ceremony. In terms of power and influence, not to mention the king of the county, even officials cannot match, because she is a woman. If she didn't have the support of her father and brother, then she would be nothing in the capital as a princess. It is also because of understanding that she feels that Xiaofu's heart is precious, and she is very lucky to have such a fiancé. And it was not until many years later that Bezu asked about this matter again that she found out what her husband was thinking. At that time, she had read everything in the world and used her own ability to stand on the political stage of Daki. When she heard her husband's words, she couldn't help but burst into tears. She stretched out her hand to wipe away the tears and said, "Then we should be grateful to our father and mother." Xiaofu wiped away her tears and said with a smile, "I can't thank them. If they didn't let us grow up so much, I might not think so." At that time, Xiaofu thought that way out of his heart, because of the education he had received since he was a child, not because he hated the world so much and wanted to reform. And when he understood the consequences of his original thoughts, he and his wife had gradually drifted away from the path of women's rights. No matter from the situation or from the heart, they were unwilling to turn back. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1452. When Xiaofu and the others returned home victorious in diplomacy, the first thing they did was to submit a letter to present the results and reward the envoys for their merits, among which Bezu's name was impressively included. Although some courtiers couldn't see it, Bezu also received a share of credit and received a lot of rewards when the whole court did not object. They thought to themselves, since she is a woman, the reward is also gold and silver, and the big head comes from the emperor's internal treasury. The treasury only has a little gold and silver, so let's reward it as it pleases, and they just pretend they didn't see the name. The envoys of the envoy group have no objection, because Princess Bezu has indeed contributed a lot during this mission to India. Without her coming forward to communicate with the Indian emperor's harem, they might not be able to complete any return home so smoothly. It's not that they robbed their official positions, the emperor rewarded people with his own treasures, and they were happy to watch the excitement. Chi Ziyuan and other adults didn't pay attention to the children's nonsense. Even Chi Heiran didn't think that his daughter could turn out flowers, but he still went to show off his daughter with a face full of pride. Others say to show off his son and grandson, but his son and grandson are too naughty and will only cause him trouble. There is really nothing for him to show off, so he can only show off his daughter. No one expected that Princess Bezu would frequently appear on the booklets after she got married, and would be rewarded by the emperor for her meritorious service. When Bezu came back from India, Mu Yangling consciously fulfilled her daughter's wish, so she asked her, "Are you still willing to travel far away?" Bezu lowered her head and thought for a while, then nodded and said, "Mother, although going to sea is hard, I still think it's worth it." "But you don't want to run away within 2 years." Chi Heiran walked in with a cold face, and said coldly, "You have to get ready to get married." Unexpectedly, Bezu, who thought she would resist, had her eyes brightened, and asked happily, "You and Uncle Fan have set a date for the wedding? Then when will I get married?" Mu Yangling was sad and asked, "You really want to get married that much?" Chi Heiran also looked at his daughter with hurt eyes. Bezu twitched the corner of her mouth and asked, "Didn't you make me marry?" Chi Heiran rolled his eyes, and said, "Your dowry is not ready yet, you are a princess, you must have things, and your fourth brother is not married, so you have to marry him a wife before it is your turn. You can embroider some dowry first, and then get married after your fourth brother gets married." Bezu opened her mouth wide. When will she have to wait? Her fourth brother still hasn't gotten the hang of it. If her brother doesn't get married, she won't be able to get married, right? No, daughters don't discuss with sons together. I only heard that sisters discuss marriage, and brothers must follow the order when discussing relatives. Why do brothers and sisters discuss together? Bezu looked at her father suspiciously. Mu Yangling was also full of doubts. Did she get the marriage rules of this era wrong again? It seems that I have to ask Lishun after the fact, but the boys in their family are always late. If the little leopard is as stubborn as the tiger head, is it possible that her daughter is not married yet? Chi Heiran was just trying to get angry with his daughter on purpose, for fear that she would ask deeper questions, so he waved his hands with disgust on his face after speaking, okay, let's go quickly, your mother is still on her lunch break, for you, your mother has too. I haven't slept well in the afternoon. Bezu could only walk out in frustration. Why hadn't she heard of this rule? Don't let his father lie to him. Bezu couldn't help but gritted her teeth, and decided to go to Ziofu to discuss ideas. If there was such a rule, then they would have to bother to find a suitable wife for the fourth brother. And Mu Yangling in the room was also breaking his fingers with a worried face and said, "What if the fourth child doesn't understand the orb? This rule can't be changed. Why don't you let the eldest brother directly order a wedding date, and the emperor will come out? All rules have to be compromised." Seeing that she was so worried, Chi Heiran couldn't help but rolled his eyes to the sky, and said contemptuously, "You really believe it? You have married several daughters-in-law long ago, and you haven't even figured out these rules." Mu Yangling was taken aback for a moment before realizing that he was lying, and couldn't help kicking him. "Are you all right to tease me?" The kick on the leg was like a tickle. Chi Heiran sat down on the couch indifferently, cross-legged, and said bluntly, "I didn't want to lie to you. I don't know any rules. Speaking of this, Chi Heiran squinted at her contemptuously. Come on, come and tell me how you grew up these past few decades. You even have grandchildren, but you don't even understand the most basic rules of marriage. Mu Yangling stared at him with black lines all over his face. Chi Heiran continued to shake his head and said, I saw our daughter's expression of resentment for marriage, and I thought that a girl like her might not know this to deceive her, but look at her just now. I can assure you, she only believes you paid 30% of the money, but it turned out that you were lucky, you didn't lie to your daughter, you fell into the pit by yourself. Mu Yangling covered his face in embarrassment, couldn't help but fell on the couch and shrank to one side. Chi Heiran was even more proud when he saw her, and leaned close to her and asked, Come on, tell me why you believe what I said. Mu Yangling was so annoyed by his sarcasm that he couldn't help but grab the pillow next to him and smashed it into his arms, shouting, Why else? It's not because I believe you, I don't believe anything you say. Chi Heiran was taken aback for a moment, and said, I didn't believe you when I said I wasn't drinking. Is that business? Mu Yangling couldn't help but glared at him and said, and why didn't you completely dissipate the smell of alcohol when you said that? Mu Yangling snorted and said, when you said something serious, why would I doubt you? Chi Heiran tilted his head and thought it was true, Aling would suspect him of lying about such trivial matters as drinking and not taking a bath, but marriage is a major matter, so she naturally did not expect that he lied to her. Chi Heiran touched his nose guiltily, but immediately regained his confidence and asked, but shouldn't all housewives be aware of these rules? What's more, you married your son's daughters-in-law, you should know even more. Mu Yangling became angry from embarrassment. There are so many rules of marriage, there are hundreds of rules, big and small, how can I remember so many? Chi Heiran still looked at her suspiciously. It's not because you're too stupid to not know. Ah, I know, it's my fault, stop beating me, my hair is all messed up. The incident ended with Mu Yangling holding the pillow and beating Chi Heiran hard. In the end, Mu Yangling ordered Chi Heiran to explain clearly to Beizu at night, is it okay to talk nonsense about rules? What if your daughter follows this rule when she kisses your grandchildren in the future, then how poor are the grandchildren? But before Chi Heiran had time to explain to his daughter, Fan Zijin came to the door. When he saw Chi Heiran, he showed a bright smile, stepped forward and took his hand and said, I really want to find you, come, let's come talk about the wedding dates of the two children, how about finding a date next year? More than half of this year has passed, how far can next year go? Chi Heiran opened his mouth to object, but Fan Zijin suddenly said with a smile, by the way, I went back to my side first, but I saw Ziofu and Beizu sitting together with a sad face. I was thinking about the two children. The marriage is coming soon, and what is there to worry about when you come back after making great contributions? Do you think I went up to ask them the reason? Chi Heiran immediately shut his mouth honestly, knowing that he made up such a rule, Zijin could laugh at him for 10 years, and would spread the story to everyone. Chi Heiran felt that he couldn't afford to lose this person.